Hello, Leo. This is your story for the week. So enjoy. We got the King of Pentacles. King of Pentacles. Who is he? And what was the challenge this King of Pentacles faced? Or what was this story of this King of Pentacles? Okay. Oh, here we go. The Eight of Wands. Figuring out who this King of Pentacles figure is. Seems to live in the mountains. And then the Eight of Wands. So there once was an old man of the mountain who travelers would often climb to seek advice from, and who would periodically send messages down to the people below, or in the villages below, that would be interpreted as like oracles. So, once upon a time, there was an old man who lived in a mountain, and his fame was spread far and wide. He had a gift for having visions, and when he had visions, he had messengers that would run up and down the mountain and relay them to the people in the local villages to interpret for themselves. And there were also people who came to this man for advice. Leaders, normal folk, but you have to understand the trip up this mountain was really treacherous and difficult, and most people gave up like halfway up. Very few got to the top. So most people waited for these messages to come down. So I suppose our story will center around one of these messages. Oh, here we go. Woo! Okay. So, one day he had a vision, a marvelous vision of a lady in white sitting in her home between two pillars, which then he saw collapse upon her. And as the collapsing happened, the whole room began to spin and to disappear and dripped into a cup. Ooh, but what does this vision mean? He had no idea. He just had the visions. It was up to other people to interpret. So down this message went. Down this message went. Who could this woman be? What does it signify? On and on, from village to village, people talked about and learned this message. And because it was such a frightful message of destruction, there was a lot of fear. So there was called a meeting between the villages that existed in the valleys around the mountains. To all of the major leaders would come and discuss, and townsfolk as well, would come and discuss what they had seen or what they thought of this vision. Everybody kind of came together. So they decided to meet in the biggest town, the capital, if you will, of this area, and to have this, discussion. So on these people traveled town to town, to get to the capital. And once there, they had a discussion, and there was like hot debates going on, like what could this mean? What does this signify? Funnily enough, as this happened, the weather changed. So they're all meeting in this open area, having this discussion, and all of a sudden the wind comes and the skies blacken, and the wind kind of starts whistling through the air. As the winds whistle through the air, the mountains began to rumble. They were having an earthquake. And the people were shaken. Many of them collapsed to the ground or fell to the ground because of the enormity of the, earthquake. And, there were a lot of people hurt. There were screams happening. There were people running to and fro. Chaos everywhere. In this major village that we're talking about, many homes and shops just began crumbling to the ground. And in the crowd, a young man stood up and decided that he would go up the mountain and try to figure out what this warning meant. So he didn't tell anyone he went, and everyone assumed that he had died. They couldn't find him. They figured he'd been crushed. His family was freaked out. And you have to understand, this major village was mostly destroyed. And many of the people who traveled from their surrounding villages, were not sure what to expect when they got home. This was, a really terrifying experience. Many were injured. The village that was destroyed that they were in too needed a lot of help. So a lot of people were running to and fro to, offer help to people whose homes had been destroyed. So this was chaos. And in the chaos, they assumed that this boy was lost. So he went up the mountain. As he went up the mountain, let's see what he found. Okay. Interesting. We have a lot of figures here. He moved slowly, and as he was going up, a man was rushing down the mountain, just storming down the mountain. And he bumped into him along the way and knocked the boy over. And he's like, "What is someone so young as you doing going up this mountain? It's dangerous up there. I've had to give up." I have to know. I have to ask the man directly about his vision. It's the man was like, "Do you have any supplies?" And the boy said, "No." It's well, it's an arduous journey. You're going to need some help. So the man unloaded the boy with his knapsack, gave him food. There was food. There was a long piece of wool. There were some tools, in this little knapsack. He said, "Take this. I don't need it." And so on the boy went with a bit more spring in his step. And then he, what he wanted to ask about in the vision was what the cup was, because he saw the destruction happen and he was trying to interpret it for himself. He wanted to know about the lady in this cup that they turned into. And so on he went up the mountain, and he met a woman coming down rather slowly but methodically. And he ran to her and said, "My lady, I'm going to see the man of the mountain. Have you seen him?" And she said, "Why, yes, I see him regularly." And he's like, "Really? I've heard that this journey is so difficult." "Well, it is, my boy, but when you know the way, it's not so hard at all." And he says to her, "Would you show me the way?" She looked at the boy and said, "Yes, I will, but you have to tell me why." And the boy said, "I'm trying to understand a vision. I think that I know what it is, but I can't be certain." "Do you mean the vision that was most recently laid out?" And the boy said, "Yes." "I see. Well, then come with me." Many have tried to discern this message, but have been unsuccessful. So he followed her, and she began scrambling up these massive boulders to the side of on the side of the path. And he says, "Where are you going?" And she said, "This is the way." He's like, "Doesn't the path lead to it?" "Oh no. The easy path is not how you get to the man of the mountain. You have to climb the boulders." So he followed after her. And as you can guess, it was difficult, very difficult. And by the end, an hour or so later, they had reached the top. And she seemed to be fine. He was short of breath, exhausted, filthy. He had dropped many of the supplies the man had given him. And yeah, he was feeling rather defeated, but at the same time, he had gotten to the end. And she said, "I will leave you here. You can go to you can go into his house on your own. And on top of this mountain is this adorable little cottage with a chimney and smoke coming out of it and a garden around the top. It looks like a tiny little paradise, and there's chickens wandering around the yard. There's a dog sleeping outside. There's a cat jumping out of the window, like adorable." And as he walks through the door, suddenly he just grows 1 foot. And, his arms get long, his clothes are all like short on him, and he's like, "What's going on?" And he sees the old man there, and the man says, "My boy, you have come. You have come to find the truth. Let me tell you another vision." And so he's in a state of shock. He can't even speak because he's trying to figure out anything. And the man tells him of the lady of the world who arrived and established, or who created the mountain that they were on. He tells this boy about this lady who, created the mountain and all the surrounding villages, and then who flew into the sky and disappeared. And he said, the boy looks at him and says, like, "Well, what does it all mean? I'm trying to figure out this story about the woman and the collapsing pillars and the draining into the cup." And he says, "My boy, you will see, but you have to go back down the mountain now." And with that, he kicks the boy out of his house, and the boy's just stunned, and he has to scramble down these boulders again. He his clothes no longer fit, they're rags on him, and he wanders down this mountain. He finally gets to the path and where he met the lady, and begins walking down. And as he's walking down, he notices people going up, and he just doesn't say anything to them. They're like, "Oh, hey, have you seen the man?" He's just not gonna speak to them. Still kind of in a state of shock, mind you. And he's messy, and his hair is all matted all over the place. He's a wreck. He goes down the mountain. And as he comes back down to go back to where he came from, he doesn't recognize anything. Everything's kind of shifted. he goes back the direction that he came not long before, that day, mind you. And the path seems all weird. He's confused. And so he spots some travelers, and he spots some people, and he's like, how do I get back to the village? And they tell him, and he's just confused. And as he returns to the village, like, that he came from, it's in complete shambles. Like, it's mainly boarded up. There's like some animals about and like some transients, but for the most part he doesn't recognize it at all. It's not the bustling place it once was. And he just calls out to them like, what happened? Where is everyone? And they say to him, well, there was an earthquake 3 years ago and everyone packed off and went to this other village. You know, anyone who was anyone. And he says, 3 years ago? That happened earlier today. And so he's like standing reeling, like, I'm trying to like make sense of it. And they're like looking at him, and they think he's one of them because his clothes are all tattered and worn, and he looks like such a mess, like he's been completely left in the wilderness. And he's like, oh, what village did everyone go to? And so they explained to him that they went to the second largest village, which he knew how to get to, but night was descending. And so the boy had to sleep in the dark overnight. And in this, he's like trying to make sense of everything. He didn't sleep a wink, but he was cold. He was scared. People were messing with him. You know, it was really, really strange. So, you know, he figures out like the next day what he's gonna do. At this point, he's dehydrated. He's hungry. There's no food in this abandoned place, and he sets off, weary and sick. Oh. And he collapses halfway there, and he awakens in the warm home of a family. And they look at him and they say, my dear boy, you had collapsed. You seem to be in tatters. What has happened to you? How have you come to be this way? And he tells them the story of going and seeing the man on the mountain. And they said, well, no one's gone to see the man on the mountain in years. You know, or that we know of. You know, they hadn't, like, we haven't heard anything from him in years. Do you have any stories from the man on the mountain? And so he tells them the story about this woman who created the mountain and the villages around them, like, and how she flew back up into the sky. And so they listen intently. And they say, okay, well, we'll help you deliver this message. But you're weak and you're sick, you know, you're going to need to rest. And so they house him in their home for a few days. They get to know him. He regains his strength. They give him clothing. They give him directions to the closest village. And yeah, he goes there. And of course he doesn't recognize it at all. You have to understand, he was a small boy when he left. And now he's like an adolescent, and he's like wandering through, and like he goes up to people and they're like rude and they're jabbing at him, and they're just like, what do you want? What are you looking for? He's like, I have a message from the man of the mountain, but I also would like to find my family, you know. And people are just like laughing at him, cajoling him, like not taking him seriously. And finally someone, you know, listens to this bit, and they're like, well, who is your family? And so he says their name, and this woman is like, okay, I'll take you to them. I know who they are. And of course he gets there, and they're his cousins basically, but it's good because he's getting closer to solving the mystery. And they're saying, like, my God, where have you been? You've been missing for like 3 years. Tells them the story, and they, they're like, okay, we're gonna help you. We'll take you to your family, but first we have to give this message out, from the old man on the mountain. And he's just so disoriented because, like, he went up and got this, like, message, and he's realizing how much of his time has flown by, how much he's changed, and, like, what seemed like a day was several years. He's very disoriented. So they take him to the local clergyman and say, look, he has a message from the man on the mountain. The clergyman listens and says, oh no, you mustn't tell this story. The world was not created, or our villages in the mountains were not created by a lady in the sky. They were created by God. He's like, he hands him like a sack of coins. It says, it's best to keep some of these stories to ourselves. Oh my goodness. So our boy leaves and he says, it's fine. I'll just go, find my family, because really he's scared and traumatized at this point. And he has all this money. Anyway, his cousins explained to him, like, it's great that you've been given this money because your family's been really poor, ever since you went, your brother died, your mother died, your father's fallen into, your father's fallen into financial, while they're okay, and he's working all the time, and it's basically a case of working against the clock. So you coming back with this money is going to be great for them. So he goes to the next village on, with his cousins, bringing the money, and runs into his father, and his father doesn't recognize him at first, and he's like, oh my God. But then he embraces him also because he has this money, right? And he's like, my dear boy, welcome back. Tell me, why were you gone for so long? And he tells him the story of the man on the mountain, and also decides to tell his father about the lady who created, the mountain and the world around them. And the father listens and says, I see. And, reiterates the basically clergyman or priest same message, that it's important to keep that story to themselves. And with that, the earth shakes again. The earth begins to shake. Buildings begin to collapse. Their home is fine, but around them chaos reigns supreme. And the boy realizes that this lady from the initial story, who sat between the two pillars and was collapsed upon, and this lady who created the world, they're the same lady. And she's collapsing. She's all of this destruction, all of this chaos, all of these earthquakes keep happening because people keep pretending she doesn't exist. And so he then makes it his mission, right, to go from town to town and to tell this story. He shouts out, he leaves his home, basically, and he shouts out, it is the lady. She's coming back. We have to consecrate this land to her. And so as he basically goes on this journey, and he's going around telling people all of this, there's a lot of people coming after him at the same time. They don't want this message getting out, but it starts to spread like wildfire, and people are like, oh my goodness, and they're having suddenly remembrances of this story coming back, and some of the older people are like, yes, there once was a story about a lady who created the mountain and the villages, but that was they stopped saying it. And I remember being a child, and the church, and they told us not to tell this story anymore, and they told us that it was wicked and that we had to repent from it. So, like, while he's being chased, you know, and like suffering, the message is getting out, like, in a big way. And he starts to become this kind of local hero. So people start taking him in, feeding him, abetting him, getting him around. He's basically in exile, or like a fugitive status, not at exile. He's like in fugitive status, like running, on the run. You have to understand, this boy is like, hasn't had any rest at all. Anyway. The boy makes a friend in these travels, and the friend decides to join him, and they become like a team. So he and this other boy, like, decides to disguise one another, go in disguise as brothers, and to like kind of get around that way. And this is interesting. So they go into the home of a noble couple who own most of the land in the area, to work, you know, as brothers. They disguise themselves as brothers. They go and get jobs in this household, right? And you know, these people like hire them, take them in, don't know who they are, you know, but give them work and lodging, and they stay there for a while. And as the boy is like serving this couple, he begins to notice things about their home that is unusual. Mainly, like, the lady herself has a really incredible set of apartments to herself, which are not to be disturbed by anyone. But she calls on him to come in to help her clean one day. And she stops him and says, look, you may see some things that are confusing and disturbing when you go into this room, and I'm going to need you to not say anything. Now, he hadn't been saying anything about a lot of things for a while. You know, he'd just been on the run. So he says, my lady, it's fine, I'll do that, whatever. Goes into the room, and it's like a plain, you know, black room. There's hardly anything going on. There's a table. There's like a pot in the corner over a fire cooking, and you know, there's been basically a spill. So he goes in and he starts cleaning up this spill of like water, and she closes the door behind him and like locks it. And he stands up surprised, and she says, I know you know who created this land. And he's like, my lady, you know, I don't know what you mean. And she says, yes, you do. And she says, I know you spoke to my cousin, the man of the mountain. And she basically then like reveals herself to him, and like it's the same woman from this vision he had, like, and he's just like stunned, and he's like, well, why does nobody know about you? Why are we being tasked with keeping this secret? And she says basically that there were too many demands on her when she was visible, and she had to cloak herself, to disguise herself as a person in order to continue to live in the lands that she created. And that this story was revealed to him basically so that he could come and live with her. And he says, but my lady, like, I still don't understand what the meaning of the first vision was, And she says, the destruction led to the cup. And she points in the corner at the cup, the pot that's boiling, over the open fire. And she says, go and gaze into the pot. And he looks in to this pot. He walks over and he looks in. And inside, he has a vision come to him. And the vision that he sees in the pot reveals everything to him. He sees the mountain, he sees the village, he sees the home he's in, he sees all of it appear in this cup, right? He sees all of the things appear in this cup, in this vision. Like they all kind of are coming into this like water. And she says, you must understand, I am creating this entire world from my pot here. And I need help because I can't get out, because I could, be recognized, and because of my powers, I need the assistance of some of you to help keep this thing going. And periodically, I provide challenges and destruction to find who is the bravest, the pluckiest, and the most enduring, who can be tasked with this great information, the great responsibility I have, and you have been chosen. And so he comes to understand that, like, this was all a test to bring him to this position in this household. And he says, well, you just wanted me to serve you? And she's like, well, don't think of it as serving me. Think of it as serving your entire community. We needed it to be put back together. And you've done that. And then she says, look into the pot again, right? I will give you one more vision. And then you have to leave and not speak of what you've seen. And so he looks into the pot again. And he sees the lady before him, and she's pregnant with child, holding her belly high, and walking the grounds of the property that they live on. And he looks back at her, and then she says, yes, you are to be father of my child, right? He's like, well, what about the king of the house? And then, she tells him basically that she created him. She needs a real human to mate with in order to, like, ferment the land, basically. But she needed to find the right one. And he's just, like, overwhelmed, freaked out, wants to leave. But she says, don't worry, these things will manifest in time, right? And with that, she sends him from her chamber. They don't speak of it, but slowly, because of the vision he had that she gave him, basically, he begins to wonder, and like they grow closer, and eventually they pair up and have a child. And that child goes on to rule the entire land. How romantic. Okay, that's enough of a story for you, Leo. It's extra, but so are you, right? If you liked the video, please give it a like. Please subscribe, and please tune in next week where I will have another story for you. Goodbye. Thank you for listening. Actually, next week is a general message. Whatever. You'll have a general message next week. All right, bye, Leo.